The story of the Ottoman Empire is not merely a historical account. It is a grand epic woven from blood and iron, from dreams and ambitions, and from the confluence of three great civilizations. This tale begins not with a mighty empire, but with a small nomadic tribe, when riders on horseback galloped across the vast Anatolian steppes. They carried with them not only sharp swords and powerful bows, but also an unshakable faith, a resilient will, and a longing for a promised land. Millennia ago, this land was a crossroads of the Silk Roads, a place where ancient civilizations had risen and fallen. Now, a new empire was stirring, with the ambition to connect East and West, Asia and Europe, Islam and Christianity, under a single banner. The name Ottoman, or Osmanli in Turkish, derives from Osman I, the leader who laid the first bricks of this great empire. Initially, they were just one of countless Turkish principalities, beyliks, scattered after the collapse of the Sultanate of Rum. But it was in this chaotic context that Osman's warrior spirit and organizational skills made all the difference. They fought not just to conquer land, but to survive, to assert their place on a stage filled with formidable enemies. To the west lay the aging Byzantine Empire, a last remnant of Rome, slowly decaying yet still possessing formidable city walls and magnificent cities. To the east were the Mongol invasions, a desert storm that could sweep away everything in its path. Amidst this encirclement, the Ottomans found their way, not through sheer might, but through wisdom, flexibility, and the ability to seize opportunities. They built an elite army, with skilled warriors and absolute loyalty. But their strength was not solely in their swords. They also knew how to use religion as a tool to unify their people and spread their power. Sunni Islam, with its teachings of justice and unity, became the guiding light for them. The Ottoman warriors, also known as the Gazi, viewed the expansion of their territory not just as a military action, but as a sacred holy war, jihad. This created an extraordinary spiritual motivation, turning ordinary soldiers into indomitable warriors, ready to sacrifice for a high ideal. Historians often compare the Ottoman Empire to a great tree, with its roots deeply embedded in the history of the Middle East and its branches reaching into the sky above Europe. This great tree absorbed the Jing'ao essence of many different civilizations, the legal system of the Byzantines, the architectural art of the Persians, and the science of the Islamic world. This synthesis created a unique cultural identity, both powerful and refined, majestic and complex. From the magnificent mosques to the vibrant bazaars, from the opulent palaces to the peaceful gardens, all bore the distinct Ottoman mark. And as this story is told, we not only look back at an empire that once existed, but also see a complete picture of the rise and fall of a civilization. We will uncover the secrets behind their resounding victories, the terrifying sieges, and the ambitious reforms. We will meet the great sultans, the brilliant grand viziers, the genius architects, and the ordinary people who lived and served under the empire's banner. From the humble beginnings on the borderlands, to the peak of power when they controlled the most important trade routes in the world, the Ottoman journey is a testament to human ambition and resilience. It is a reminder that empires, like all things, are born, they flourish, and they inevitably fade, but the legacy they leave behind continues to shape the world we live in today. The ambition to capture Constantinople, the mythical city at the heart of the Christian world, was a dream that haunted Ottoman sultans for generations. It was a city of unparalleled strategic importance, a bastion of Christendom, and the last remaining fragment of the Roman Empire. To the Ottomans, it was not merely a military target. It was the ultimate prize, a symbol of divine destiny. The city's name, Istanbul, was even a testament to this, believed to derive from the Greek iis tinpalon, meaning to the city. The desire to possess it was a driving force behind Ottoman expansion, and the long, agonizing sieges that preceded the final victory only intensified this obsession. The fall of Constantinople would not just be a conquest. It would be a profound historical and psychological event, a symbolic transfer of power from the old world to the new. The stage for this epic confrontation was set by Sultan Mehmed II, a young, brilliant, and ruthlessly ambitious ruler who ascended to the throne in 1451. At just 19 years old, he was not intimidated by the city's formidable walls or its legendary reputation. He saw Constantinople not as an obstacle, but as a gateway to his grand imperial vision. He immediately began meticulous preparations for the siege, a process that showcased his strategic genius and forward-thinking mindset. He ordered the construction of a massive fortress, Hushistory, on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly across from the existing Ottoman fortress of Anatolia. This move gave the Ottomans complete control over the strait, cutting off all sea-based supplies and reinforcements to the city. It was a clear declaration of intent, a gauntlet thrown down to the last Roman emperor. Mehmed's technological innovations were equally breathtaking. He commissioned a Hungarian engineer named Urban to build a series of colossal cannons, including one so massive it could fire a stone ball weighing over 1,200 pounds. These superguns, unprecedented in their size and destructive power, were a game-changer. They were painstakingly transported over land and water to the siege lines, their very presence a testament to the Sultan's determination. The siege began in earnest in April 1453. The Ottoman army, numbering over 80,000 soldiers, surrounded the city on land, while a fleet of ships blockaded the sea. The Byzantine defenders, a small force of a few thousand, were led by the courageous but outnumbered Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos. They fought with a desperate valor, hoping for a miracle or for reinforcements from the west that never came. The siege was a testament to both human ingenuity and brute force. For weeks, the massive cannons bombarded the city's seemingly impregnable Theodosian walls, creating breaches that the Janissaries would then attempt to storm. The defenders would work tirelessly to repair the walls, often at night, in a desperate struggle to hold back the tide. One of the most audacious maneuvers of the siege was when Mehmed, unable to break through the chain that guarded the entrance to the Golden Horn, had his engineers build a road of greased logs and rollers. They then physically dragged dozens of his ships overland, bypassing the chain and allowing the Ottoman fleet to attack the city from a new, unexpected direction. This act of sheer engineering brilliance and audacity stunned the defenders and was a decisive psychological blow. The final assault came on May 29, 1453. After weeks of relentless bombardment, the Ottoman army launched a full-scale attack from all sides. The Janissaries, the elite shock troops, were the first to breach the walls. The city fell, and Emperor Constantine XI, a symbol of the old world, died fighting bravely in the streets. The capture of Constantinople marked a watershed moment in world history. It was a seismic event that historians often use to mark the end of the Middle Ages. For the Ottoman Empire, it was the ultimate validation of their power and destiny. Mehmed II, now known as the Conqueror, Fatih, entered the city triumphantly and immediately rode to the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia. He declared it a mosque, a symbolic act that cemented the city's new identity as the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The city was renamed Istanbul, and it would remain the heart of the empire for centuries to come. The fall of Constantinople was more than just a military victory. It was a cultural and intellectual transfer. The city, which had been a repository of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, now became the center of a new, vibrant empire. Many Greek scholars fled to Italy, taking with them priceless manuscripts and igniting the Renaissance in the West. But within Istanbul itself, the Ottomans began a massive rebuilding program, transforming it into a magnificent imperial capital. The city's multi-ethnic and multi-religious population was allowed to continue their lives under Ottoman rule, a testament to Mehmed's pragmatic policy of coexistence, a policy that would be a hallmark of the empire for centuries. The Ottoman Empire was now not just a regional power. It was a global player, an empire of mud, brick, and bronze, poised to dominate the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the trade routes that connected east and west. The dream was no longer a dream. It was a glorious, tangible reality. The period following the conquest of Constantinople saw the Ottoman Empire expand at an astonishing rate, but it was under the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, 1520 to 1566, that the empire reached its undisputed zenith. This was a golden age of unparalleled military might, cultural brilliance, and legal reform. For the West, he was a formidable adversary, a terrifying sultan whose armies stood at the gates of Vienna. For his own people, he was Kanuni, the lawgiver, a just and wise ruler who brought prosperity and stability. His reign represents the pinnacle of Ottoman power, a time when the empire was a true world superpower, controlling vast territories on 3 continents and shaping the course of global events. Suleiman's military campaigns were legendary, a series of relentless and successful expansions that extended the empire's borders to their greatest extent. He began by conquering Belgrade in 1521, a strategic fortress that had resisted previous Ottoman attempts. This victory opened up the path to Hungary and Central Europe. The Battle of Mohacs in 1526 was a stunning victory for the Ottomans, where their army annihilated the Hungarian forces and their king, effectively ending Hungarian independence and bringing a vast new territory under Ottoman rule. Suleiman's armies then marched to the very heart of Europe, laying siege to Vienna in 1529. Although the siege ultimately failed, it was a profound psychological blow to the Christian powers and a stark demonstration of Ottoman might. It solidified the Ottoman Empire's reputation as a major player on the European stage, a force that could threaten the very foundations of Western civilization. On the seas, Suleiman's navy, under the command of the brilliant Admiral Barbarossa Hayreddin Pasha, dominated the Mediterranean. They captured the strategic island of Rhodes from the Knights Hospitaller, who had been a constant thorn in the Ottoman side. The Ottoman fleet, now a formidable force, controlled the key trade routes of the Mediterranean, challenging the supremacy of Venice and Spain. The conquests of North Africa, including Tripoli, Tunisia, and Algeria, brought vast new territories and resources into the empire, transforming it into a true naval power and expanding its influence across the African continent. This expansion was not just about land. It was about controlling the global flow of goods and people, from the trade routes of the Indian Ocean to the markets of Europe. But Suleiman's legacy extends far beyond military prowess. He was a patron of the arts and architecture, transforming Istanbul into a magnificent imperial capital. His chief architect, Mimar Sinan, a genius often compared to Michelangelo, created some of the most beautiful and iconic structures in the empire. The Suleimani Mosque, with its elegant domes and towering minarets, is a masterpiece of Ottoman classical architecture, a symbol of the empire's power and devotion. Sinan's works, including countless mosques, bridges, and aqueducts, define the architectural style of the Ottoman Golden Age and are admired to this day for their beauty, engineering, and harmony. Suleiman's most enduring legacy, however, was his legal reforms. He inherited a complex and often contradictory body of laws, and he embarked on a mission to codify and simplify them. He created the Canoname, a comprehensive set of legal codes that covered everything from criminal law to land tenure and taxation. This legal framework, based on both Islamic law, Sharia, and imperial decrees, brought a new level of order and justice to the vast empire. It protected the rights of peasants, regulated trade, and ensured a degree of stability that was rare in the 16th century. It was this commitment to justice that earned him the title of the lawgiver and secured the loyalty of his diverse subjects. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman was not a brutal dictatorship. It was a complex, well-organized state with a sophisticated bureaucracy and a legal system that was, for its time, remarkably advanced. The empire's internal administration was also refined during this period. The system of a centralized bureaucracy, with a powerful Grand Vizier serving as the Sultan's chief minister, became highly effective. The Divan-i-Humayun, the Imperial Council, was the seat of government where all major decisions were made. The Janissaries and the elite cavalry corps, the Sipahis, were at their peak, a disciplined and loyal fighting force that maintained order both at home and abroad. The cultural life of the empire flourished, with poets, painters, and scholars producing some of the finest works of Islamic art and literature. The courts of Suleiman were centers of learning and creativity, attracting intellectuals and artists from across the known world. The Golden Age of Suleiman was a time of confidence, prosperity, and cultural brilliance. It was the moment when the Ottoman Empire fully realized its potential, becoming a true world power, a political and cultural force that would shape the future of Europe, Asia, and Africa for centuries to come. The golden age of Suleiman the Magnificent, for all its splendor and power, contained the seeds of the empire's eventual decline. The death of a strong, centralizing sultan often led to a power vacuum, and the period following Suleiman's reign saw a gradual shift away from the direct, hands-on rule of the sultan. This new era, often referred to as the Sultanate of Women, was a time when the powerful women of the imperial harem, sultanas, mothers, and concubines, wielded immense political influence behind the scenes. This was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of the traditional power structures. While the empire continued to be a formidable force, the internal dynamics of the court changed, leading to political instability, corruption, and a weakening of the central authority. The rise of the harem's influence was a complex phenomenon. It was partly a result of the practice of fratricide, where a new sultan would often have his brothers killed to prevent rival claims to the throne. This practice, though brutal, had a chillingly pragmatic purpose. It ensured a smooth and unchallenged succession. However, it also meant that future sultans were often young and inexperienced, having spent their lives secluded in the cage, a system where potential heirs were confined to a luxurious but isolated life within the palace. This lack of exposure to governance and military life made them highly dependent on their mothers and wives, who had the political acumen and experience to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics. The most notable figures of this period were Hurrem's Sultan, Suleiman's beloved wife, and later Kozum Sultan, who acted as de facto regent for her young sons and grandsons. These women were not mere figures. They were shrewd politicians, capable of manipulating grand viziers, influencing military campaigns, and shaping the fate of the empire. While the Sultanate of Women brought a degree of internal instability, the real cracks began to appear in the military and economic spheres. The Janissary Corps, once the elite fighting force of the empire, began to lose its edge. They gained the right to marry and enroll their sons in the corps, transforming them from a meritocratic, disciplined force into a hereditary, self-serving class. Their loyalty shifted from the sultan to their own interests, and they began to use their power to influence politics and even to depose sultans. The Janissaries, once the protectors of the empire, became a powerful internal threat, a state within a state. Economically, the influx of silver from the New World caused a significant inflation, destabilizing the empire's currency and disrupting its traditional economic systems. The long, expensive wars against the Habsburgs and the Persians placed an immense strain on the imperial treasury, and the empire's administrative system, once a marvel of efficiency, became slow and corrupt. By the mid-17th century, the empire was in a state of crisis. The need for reform was urgent, and it was a series of brilliant, but often ruthless, grand viziers from the Koprulu family who stepped in to try and stem the tide of decline. The Koprulu era, 1656 to 1702, was a period of fierce reform and renewed military vigor. Koprulu Mehmed Pasha, the first of the dynasty, was given extraordinary powers by the Sultan, including the right to execute any official he deemed corrupt without a trial. He used this power to ruthlessly purge the corrupt elements from the administration and the military. He restored order, re-established the authority of the central government, and led a series of successful military campaigns that brought a new sense of confidence to the empire. His son, Koprulu Fazıl Ahmed Pasha, continued his father's work, further strengthening the administration and leading the army in a new push into Europe. The siege of Candia, Crete, was a major victory that ended a long, costly war with Venice. These reforms, while temporarily successful, were ultimately a symptom of the empire's deeper problems. The Koprulu viziers were acting as strongmen, using their personal power to keep the empire together. They were not addressing the fundamental issues of a changing world, a world where European powers were developing new military technologies, exploring new trade routes, and embracing new political and economic ideas. The Ottomans, for all their strength, were becoming increasingly isolated, clinging to a system that had worked for centuries but was now becoming obsolete. The Siege of Vienna in 1683, led by another Copperlu vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, marked a critical turning point. The siege was a devastating failure, a shocking defeat that not only halted Ottoman expansion into Europe, but also signaled the beginning of a long, slow retreat. The battle, and the subsequent Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, forced the Ottomans to cede large territories to their European rivals, an unprecedented humiliation that shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility. The seeds of decline, sown in the splendor of the Golden Age, had now begun to bear their bitter fruit, and the era of uncontested Ottoman supremacy was coming to a close. The 18th and 19th centuries were a period of profound crisis for the Ottoman Empire, a long, agonizing decline that saw it lose its status as a world power. The myth of Ottoman invincibility was shattered, and the empire, once a source of terror and admiration, was now referred to by European powers as the sick man of Europe. This wasn't a single catastrophic event, but a slow, systemic decay brought on by a combination of internal strife, external pressure, and a failure to adapt to the rapidly changing global landscape. While European nations were undergoing industrial, technological, and political revolutions, the Ottoman Empire remained largely tethered to its traditional, agrarian, and highly centralized structure, which was no longer fit for purpose. Internally, the empire was plagued by a series of crises. The once efficient Janissary Corps, which had become a powerful and conservative force, actively resisted any attempts at modernization. They saw new ideas and technologies as a threat to their power and privileges, and they used their immense influence to depose sultans and sabotage reforms. This institutional sclerosis meant that the Ottoman military, once the most advanced in the world, fell behind the technologically superior armies of Europe. The decentralized nature of the empire also led to the rise of powerful provincial governors and local warlords who, though nominally under the Sultan's rule, often acted as independent rulers. This fragmentation of power weakened the central government and made it difficult to collect taxes, raise armies, and enforce imperial law. The once stable economy was also in a state of disarray, as European merchants, with their superior technology and more efficient trading networks, began to bypass traditional Ottoman trade routes and dominate the global economy. Externally, the empire was under relentless pressure from all sides. The Russian Empire, under Catherine the Great, saw itself as the heir to the Byzantine Empire and had a long-standing ambition to capture Constantinople and control the Black Sea Straits. A series of devastating wars with Russia resulted in significant territorial losses for the Ottomans, including the loss of the Crimea in 1783, a symbolic and strategic blow. The rise of nationalism in the Balkans, fueled by the ideals of the French Revolution, was another major threat. The Christian populations of Serbia, Greece, Bulgaria, and other regions, inspired by the idea of self-determination, began to demand independence. The Greek War of Independence, 1821 to 1829, a brutal and prolonged conflict, was a wake-up call for the Ottomans. Despite a fierce resistance, they were ultimately forced to recognize an independent Greek state, a humiliating defeat that signaled the beginning of the end of Ottoman rule in the Balkans. Faced with these existential threats, a new generation of reformers, often referred to as the Tanzimat reformers, emerged. They recognized that the empire's survival depended on a radical restructuring of its institutions. The Tanzimat, meaning reorganization, era, which began in 1839, was a period of ambitious, top-down reforms aimed at modernizing the military, centralizing the bureaucracy, and adopting Western legal and educational models. The most significant of these reforms was the Hadi Serif of Gulhane, imperial edict of the Rose Chamber, which promised to guarantee the life, property, and honor of all subjects, regardless of their religion. This was a revolutionary concept for the Ottoman Empire, which had traditionally been structured around a system of religious communities, millets. The reformers also sought to create a new, modern army, a process that required the brutal suppression of the Janissaries in 1826 by Sultan Mahmud II, an event known as the Auspicious Incident. The Janissary Corps was massacred, and a new, Western-style army was created in its place. However, These reforms were often too little, too late, and they faced fierce resistance from conservative elements within the empire. The reforms also created new tensions. The introduction of Western ideas of citizenship and equality challenged the traditional power of the Islamic clergy and the wealthy elite. The new, centralized bureaucracy, while more efficient, was also more intrusive and often struggled to govern the vast and diverse empire. The European powers, while outwardly supporting these reforms, were also pursuing their own interests, often intervening in Ottoman affairs to protect their own trade routes or to support the nationalist movements of the Christian populations. The Crimean War, 1853–1856, where Britain and France allied with the Ottomans to fight Russia, was a temporary reprieve, but it also highlighted the empire's dependence on foreign powers. The once mighty Ottoman Empire, which had once threatened to conquer Europe, was now a pawn in the great game of European power politics, a fragile state whose survival depended on the whims of its more powerful neighbors. The age of a dominant Ottoman Empire was over, replaced by an era of defensive maneuvers, political maneuvering, and a desperate struggle to hold on to its vast but crumbling territories. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were an era of increasing desperation for the Ottoman Empire. The Tanzimat reforms, for all their good intentions, had failed to halt the empire's decline. The external pressures from European powers and the internal forces of nationalism continued to erode its power. The reign of Sultan Abdulhamid II, 1876–1909, was a complex and contradictory period, a last-ditch effort to save the empire through a combination of centralization, traditional Islamic conservatism, and modernization. He initially embraced a new constitution and a parliament, but he soon dissolved them, fearing that they would weaken his power and lead to the empire's collapse. He ruled as an absolute monarch, using a vast network of spies and a brutal secret police to suppress dissent. While his rule was autocratic, he also pursued a policy of modernization, building railways, schools, and hospitals, and strengthening the army. He sought to unite the diverse empire under the banner of pan-Islamism, appealing to the loyalty of Muslims across the globe. However, the forces of change were too powerful to be contained. A new generation of educated, Western-oriented Ottoman intellectuals, soldiers, and bureaucrats, deeply frustrated with Abdulhamid's absolutism and the empire's continued weakness, began to organize in secret. They were known as the Young Turks, a diverse group of reformers who believed that a constitutional monarchy and modernization were the only path to saving the empire. They were inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution and the success of European nation-states. Their movement was initially a small, secretive one, but it gained momentum among the officers of the army, particularly those stationed in the Balkans, where the empire's weakness was most visible. The Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, a key organization within the Young Turk movement, became the driving force behind the revolution. In 1908, the Young Turks, with the support of disaffected army units, launched a bloodless revolution. They marched on Istanbul and forced Sultan Abdulhamid to restore the constitution and reconvene the parliament. This event, known as the Young Turk Revolution, was met with widespread celebration. It was seen as a victory for liberty and a promise of a new era for the empire. The Young Turks, now in power, embarked on a new wave of reforms. They sought to create a more centralized and efficient state, to modernize the military, and to promote a new sense of Ottoman identity that transcended religious and ethnic differences. However, the path to a modern, liberal state was far from smooth. The Young Turks were a deeply divided group, with different factions holding conflicting ideas about the future of the empire. Their rule was often heavy-handed and increasingly authoritarian. They purged political opponents, suppressed dissent, and were unable to address the deep-seated ethnic and religious tensions that plagued the empire. The most significant challenge for the Young Turks was the rise of Turkish nationalism. While they initially championed a broader Ottoman identity, their policies and rhetoric increasingly favored Turkish culture and language. This alienated the non-Turkish populations of the empire, particularly the Arabs and the Armenians, who began to feel marginalized and oppressed. The Balkan Wars, 1912–1913, a series of brutal conflicts in which the Ottomans lost nearly all of their remaining European territories, was a devastating blow to the empire and a profound humiliation for the Young Turks. The loss of so much territory and so many lives hardened the nationalist sentiment within the cup and led to a more radical and authoritarian leadership. The empire, now almost exclusively an Asian and African power, was in a state of terminal decline. The final act of the Ottoman drama was its entry into World War I. The Young Turk leadership, particularly the triumvirate of Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Cemal Pasha, saw an alliance with Germany as the only way to save the empire and reclaim its lost territories. In 1914, they secretly entered the war on the side of the Central Powers. This was a catastrophic decision. The Ottoman Empire, already weak and overstretched, was now fighting on multiple fronts against the combined might of the Allied powers. The war was a disaster for the empire, leading to crushing defeats in Mesopotamia and Palestine, and a crippling economic collapse. The most horrific event of this period, the Armenian Genocide, 1915 to 1917, was carried out under the Cup's rule. This systematic massacre and forced deportation of over 1 million Armenians remains one of the darkest chapters in modern history. The empire's collapse was now inevitable, not just because of external pressure, but because of its own internal failings and the devastating consequences of its wartime policies. The Young Turk Revolution, which had begun with such high hopes, ended in a national tragedy, paving the way for the total dissolution of the empire and the birth of a new Turkish republic from its ashes. The final chapter of a 600-year-old empire was about to be written. The Great War, as it was known then, was the final, brutal chapter in the long and storied history of the Ottoman Empire. By 1914, the empire was a shadow of its former self, a vast but weak state grappling with internal unrest and external threats. The decision to enter the war on the side of the Central Powers, a gamble orchestrated by the Young Turk triumvirate of Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha, and Cemal Pasha, was a desperate last stand. They believed that an alliance with the powerful German Empire was the only way to save the Ottoman state from being dismembered by the Entente powers and to reclaim the territories lost in the Balkan Wars. They were wrong. The war, far from being a path to salvation, accelerated the empire's collapse and led to its total dismemberment. The conflict plunged the empire into a hellish struggle on multiple fronts, a struggle that would reveal its terminal decline and lead to its final demise. The Ottoman armies, though they fought with courage and a grim determination, were technologically outmatched and logistically overstretched. On the Caucasian front, they faced the might of the Russian Empire, suffering a catastrophic defeat in the winter of 1914 to 1915 at the Battle of Sarikamish. Enver Pasha, a military leader with more ambition than skill, led his troops in a doomed offensive through the freezing mountains, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers, not from enemy fire, but from the brutal cold. This defeat, and the Young Turks' paranoia about Russian-backed Armenian insurrection, was a key factor in the decision to carry out the Armenian Genocide, a horrific campaign of mass murder and forced deportation that sought to eliminate the Armenian population from the empire. This act of state-sponsored violence remains one of the darkest chapters in modern history, a stain that the Turkish Republic, the successor state, still grapples with. The empire's most significant victory in the war was at the Battle of Gallipoli. In 1915, a combined British and French naval force, with support from Australian and New Zealand, Anzac, troops, attempted to capture the strategic Dardanelles Strait, with the ultimate goal of seizing Constantinople and knocking the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Under the brilliant command of Mustafa Kemal, a young and charismatic Ottoman officer, the Ottoman forces mounted a heroic and determined defense. The campaign, which lasted for 8 months, resulted in a humiliating defeat for the Allied powers, who were forced to withdraw after suffering heavy casualties. Gallipoli was a morale-boosting victory for the Ottomans, a moment of national pride and a testament to their fighting spirit. It also catapulted Mustafa Kemal into national prominence, a man who would later become the founder of the modern Turkish Republic. However, the victory at Gallipoli was an exception, not the rule. On the Mesopotamian front, the British, with their vast Indian forces, launched a campaign to capture Baghdad and secure the region's vital oil supplies. The Ottoman army, though initially successful at the Siege of Kut, was ultimately outmatched. The British captured Baghdad in 1917, and the Ottoman presence in the region was effectively ended. On the Arabian front, the British, under the command of Colonel T. E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, fomented the Arab revolt against Ottoman rule. The Arabs, under the leadership of Emir Faisal, sought to create an independent Arab kingdom. The Ottoman armies, fighting against both the British and their former subjects, were systematically pushed out of the Arabian Peninsula and the Levant. The war was a brutal and costly affair, with millions of soldiers and civilians dying from combat, starvation, and disease. The empire's economy collapsed, its infrastructure was in ruins, and its population was exhausted. The final collapse came in 1918. With the Central Powers on the verge of defeat, the Ottoman government signed the Armistice of Mudros, effectively surrendering. The terms of the armistice were humiliating, allowing the Allied powers to occupy key strategic locations, including Constantinople and the Straits. The Ottoman Empire was now at the mercy of the victors. The final act was the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920, a punitive treaty that officially partitioned the empire, carving out new states for the Arabs, Greeks, and Armenians, and leaving a small rump state for the Turks in Anatolia. From its ashes, a new nation, the Republic of Turkey, was about to be born, a modern, secular state that would reject the imperial past and look to the future. The signing of the Armistice of Mudros in 1918 and the subsequent Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 were intended to be the final nails in the coffin of the Ottoman Empire. The Allied powers, flushed with victory, sought to dismember the sick man of Europe once and for all, carving up its territories and establishing their own spheres of influence. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed VI and his government, now under the thumb of the Allied occupation forces in Constantinople, were resigned to this fate. They believed that any resistance was futile and that the only way to survive was to accept the terms of the victors. But in the heartland of Anatolia, a fierce spirit of defiance was stirring, fueled by a deep-seated nationalism and a refusal to accept the humiliation of foreign occupation. The man who would galvanize this spirit and lead the Turkish people to a new destiny was Mustafa Kemal, a hero of the Gallipoli campaign. Mustafa Kemal, later to be known as Ataturk, father of the Turks, was a brilliant military strategist and a charismatic leader with a clear vision for the future. He understood that the old imperial system was dead and that the only way for the Turkish people to survive was to create a new, independent, and modern nation-state. In 1919, he landed in Samsun, on the Black Sea coast, and began to organize a national resistance movement. He traveled throughout Anatolia, holding congresses in cities like Erzurum and Sivas, where he rallied disparate groups of Turkish nationalists and laid the groundwork for a new government. The central principle of his movement was the defense of the Turkish homeland and the establishment of a sovereign state free from foreign control. This was a radical break from the multi-ethnic, multi-religious ideology of the Ottoman Empire. Ataturk's vision was based on a new, modern, secular, and exclusively Turkish national identity. The Turkish War of Independence was not a single, unified conflict, but a series of brutal wars fought on multiple fronts. In the West, the Turkish nationalists faced the Greek army, which, with the encouragement of the Allied powers, had invaded Anatolia with the goal of creating a Greater Greece. The Greeks, initially successful, pushed deep into Turkish territory, but they were met with a determined resistance led by Mustafa Kemal. The Turkish forces, though poorly equipped and outnumbered, fought with a fierce patriotism. In a series of decisive battles, culminating in the Battle of the Sakarya in 1921 and the decisive Great Offensive in 1922, the Turkish army pushed the Greeks back to the sea, forcing them to evacuate Anatolia. The victory was a turning point, a powerful demonstration that the Turkish people would not be defeated. In the east, the nationalists fought against Armenian forces and, in the south, against French and British forces who were seeking to establish their control over key territories. In all these conflicts, the Turkish nationalists, with their superior leadership and the unwavering support of the Anatolian population, were able to repel the foreign invaders. The war was a brutal and costly affair, with immense suffering on both sides, but it forged a new national identity and a deep sense of unity among the Turkish people. The old Ottoman order, represented by the Sultan in Constantinople, was seen as a collaborator with the enemy and was increasingly irrelevant. In 1922, the Grand National Assembly, the nationalist parliament in Ankara, officially abolished the Ottoman Sultanate, bringing an end to the 600-year-old dynasty. The last Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI, fled into exile, and the empire was no more. The final act of this epic struggle was the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. This treaty, unlike the punitive Treaty of Sèvres, was a triumph for the Turkish nationalists. It recognized the borders of the new Republic of Turkey and restored its full sovereignty. It was a remarkable diplomatic achievement, a testament to Mustafa Kemal's political skill and the power of the Turkish military victories. The new republic, with its capital in Ankara, was now ready to embark on a new path, a path of radical, top-down modernization and westernization. Mustafa Kemal, now elevated to the status of a national hero, was elected as the first president. The new Turkey would be a secular, democratic, and modern nation, a stark contrast to the old, multi-ethnic, and theocratic Ottoman Empire. The dream of a new nation had been realized, and the long and complex history of the Ottoman Empire, with its glorious rise and its painful fall, had finally come to an end. With the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1923, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the nation's founder and first president, embarked on a series of radical, top-down reforms that would fundamentally transform Turkish society. His vision was to take a nation that had been born from the ashes of a multi-ethnic, theocratic empire and turn it into a modern, secular, and Western-oriented nation-state. This was not a gradual evolution, but a deliberate and often forceful revolution from above, touching every aspect of life, from politics and law to culture and language. Ataturk's reforms were a testament to his belief that the Turkish people, though rooted in a rich history, needed to shed the baggage of the past to embrace a new, enlightened future. This was a bold and audacious experiment, one that would redefine what it meant to be Turkish and set the country on a new, irreversible path. The most significant and immediate reform was the abolition of the Caliphate in 1924. The Caliph, the spiritual head of all Sunni Muslims and a symbolic successor to the Prophet Muhammad, had been a key institution of the Ottoman Empire for centuries. Ataturk saw it as a relic of the old, theocratic system and a potential source of counter-revolutionary sentiment. Its abolition was a powerful statement that the new Turkish state would be a secular one, with a clear separation of state and religion. The Ministry of Religious Affairs was established to oversee religious institutions, but its power was limited, and religious law, Sharia, was replaced with a new civil code modeled on the Swiss Civil Code. This was a monumental shift, bringing a modern legal framework to the country and establishing the principle of equality before the law, regardless of gender or religion. The new republic also underwent a profound cultural and social transformation. The traditional headwear, the fez, was banned, and men were encouraged to wear Western-style hats. This may seem like a trivial change, but it was a powerful symbol of Ataturk's commitment to breaking with Ottoman traditions and embracing a modern, European identity. Women were given the right to vote and hold public office, a reform that was a century ahead of its time for many European countries. They were also encouraged to shed the traditional veil and participate fully in public life. The education system was secularized and unified, with a new emphasis on science and rationalism. The old Ottoman script, which was based on the Arabic alphabet and was difficult to learn, was replaced with a new, phonetic Latin alphabet. This change, implemented in 1928, had a profound impact on literacy and communication, making it easier for people to read and write, and helping to forge a new national identity. Ataturk's economic reforms were equally ambitious. He established a state-led, mixed economy, with the government playing a key role in developing key industries like textiles and steel. He founded the first banks and industries of the new republic, laying the groundwork for future economic growth. He also embarked on a massive infrastructure building program, constructing railways, roads, and dams to connect the vast and underdeveloped country. These reforms were a testament to his belief in the power of state intervention to build a strong, independent economy. He also promoted a new sense of national pride, encouraging the study of Turkish history and language and sponsoring art and culture that celebrated the new Turkish identity. The new capital, Ankara, was transformed from a small town into a modern metropolis, a powerful symbol of the new nation's aspirations. These reforms were not without their critics. Many traditionalists and religious conservatives saw them as a betrayal of Islamic values and a slavish imitation of the West. Ataturk's rule, while revolutionary, was also authoritarian. He suppressed political opposition and used the army to enforce his reforms. He believed that the Turkish people, after centuries of imperial rule, were not yet ready for a full-fledged democracy and that a strong, guiding hand was needed to steer the nation toward a modern future. He was a visionary and a revolutionary, a man who, in a little over a decade, transformed a backward, defeated empire into a modern, confident nation. His legacy is still debated today, but there is no doubt that his reforms were a turning point in Turkish history, a radical break from the past that laid the foundations for the modern Turkish state. The story of the Ottoman Empire had ended, and a new story, the story of the Republic of Turkey, was just beginning. The end of the Ottoman Empire did not simply erase its 600-year history. Instead, it left a profound and complex legacy that continues to shape the politics, culture, and social fabric of the modern Middle East and the Balkans. The empire was not just a political entity. It was a vast, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious society that had governed millions of people with a unique blend of centralization and local autonomy. Its collapse created a power vacuum that was filled by a new order, one defined by the artificial borders drawn by European colonial powers and the new, often conflicting, forces of nationalism. The ghost of the Ottoman Empire, with its vast administrative structures, its diverse populations, and its rich cultural heritage, can still be found in the institutions, languages, and identities of the nations that rose from its ashes. The most immediate and tangible legacy was the redrawing of the map. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, a secret deal between Britain and France, carved up the Arab provinces of the empire into new mandates and protectorates. This was a brutal and cynical act of colonial power politics, which paid little to no attention to the existing ethnic, religious, and tribal boundaries. The result was the creation of a series of new states: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Transjordan, with artificial borders that would become a source of instability and conflict for a century. The seeds of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, too, were sown in the vacuum left by the Ottoman retreat from the region, with the British Balfour Declaration of 1917 promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The end of the Ottoman Empire was not a liberation for the Arabs, but a transition from one form of rule to another, a shift that would have profound and tragic consequences for the entire region. Culturally, the Ottoman legacy is deeply embedded in the successor states. In the Balkans, the Ottoman presence for over 5 centuries left a lasting impact on language, food, music, and architecture. Ottoman Turkish words are still found in the languages of Bosnia, Serbia, and Bulgaria. The magnificent mosques, bridges, and bathhouses built by Mimar Sinan and his successors still stand in cities like Sarajevo, Mostar, and Skopje, a testament to the cultural fusion that defined the Ottoman period. In the Arab world, the Ottoman influence is more subtle but equally pervasive. The architecture of cities like Damascus and Cairo bears the imprint of Ottoman rule, and the traditional administrative structures and legal systems, though replaced by new ones, often retain elements of Ottoman practice. The tradition of coffee houses, a staple of Ottoman social life, is still a central feature of urban life throughout the region. The most enduring legacy, however, is the concept of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. While the Ottoman Empire was often brutal and its later years were marked by sectarian violence, it had, for centuries, provided a framework for different religious and ethnic communities to coexist under a single ruler. The millet system, where each religious community, e.g., Orthodox Christians, Jews, and Armenians, was granted a degree of self-governance, was a unique model of pluralism. The system, though imperfect, provided a degree of stability that was lost with the rise of modern, often nationalist, nation-states. The collapse of the empire unleashed a wave of ethnic and religious conflict, with new nations often defining themselves against the other, a trend that can still be seen in the tragic conflicts in the Balkans and the Middle East today. The Ottoman Empire, for all its flaws, had provided a political and social order that, in its absence, proved to be far more dangerous. In Turkey itself, the legacy of the empire is a source of both pride and contention. The early republic, under Ataturk, sought to completely sever ties with the Ottoman past, seeing it as a symbol of backwardness and decline. The imperial palaces were turned into museums, the traditional Ottoman script was replaced, and the new nation looked to the West for its inspiration. However, in recent years, there has been a renewed interest in the Ottoman past, a cultural and political reevaluation of the empire's history. The magnificent mosques, the intricate calligraphy, and the rich cultural heritage are now being celebrated as a source of national pride. The Ottoman Empire, once a symbol of what Turkey had to overcome, is now being embraced as a source of strength and identity. The long, complex journey from a small beylik to a mighty empire and back again to a modern nation is a testament to the resilience of a people, and its legacy, both good and bad, continues to define the world we live in today. The Ottoman Empire's ascent to a global power was not solely a land-based affair. Its rise was inextricably linked to its mastery of the seas, a domain where it challenged and often defeated the great naval powers of Europe. From the conquest of Constantinople, which gave them control of the strategic Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, the Ottomans systematically built a navy that would come to dominate the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and even reach into the Indian Ocean. The story of Ottoman naval power is a testament to their adaptability, their technological innovation, and the brilliance of their admirals, men who, though often from a humble background, rose to command fleets that shaped the course of history. The seas were not a barrier for the Ottomans. They were an extension of their power, a highway for trade, and a theater for epic confrontations. The initial stages of Ottoman naval power were modest, but after the conquest of Constantinople, Sultan Mehmed II recognized the strategic importance of a strong navy. He commissioned the construction of a new fleet and began to systematically challenge the naval supremacy of Venice and Genoa in the Aegean and Black Seas. His successors continued this work, and the Ottoman navy grew in size and sophistication. But it was under Suleiman the Magnificent that the navy reached its golden age. Suleiman understood that to control the trade routes and project power across his vast empire, he needed a navy that was second to none. He turned to a series of brilliant pirate captains who had been operating in the Mediterranean, the most famous of whom was Hayreddin Barbarossa, a fearsome corsair who was so successful that Suleiman made him the admiral of the fleet, Capadon Pasha. Barbarossa was a master tactician and a brilliant naval strategist. He transformed the Ottoman navy into a professional, disciplined, and technologically advanced fighting force. He built new shipyards, trained new sailors, and introduced new naval tactics. Under his command, the Ottoman navy achieved a series of stunning victories. The Battle of Preveza in 1538, where Barbarossa's fleet decisively defeated a much larger Holy League fleet led by the great Genoese Admiral Andrea Doria, was a landmark victory that established Ottoman naval supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean for decades. The Ottomans captured key islands and coastal cities, including Rhodes, Cyprus, and much of North Africa, turning the Mediterranean into what was almost a private lake. The Ottoman navy's reach extended far beyond the Mediterranean, with expeditions into the Indian Ocean to challenge the growing Portuguese presence and protect the lucrative spice trade routes. The Ottoman navy's success was not just a result of brilliant leadership. It was also a testament to the empire's technological and logistical prowess. The shipyards of the Golden Horn in Istanbul were among the largest and most advanced in the world, capable of building and repairing hundreds of ships. The empire's vast resources, its control of key trade routes, and its highly centralized administrative structure allowed it to finance and provision a massive fleet. The Ottoman galleys, though powered by oar and sail, were powerful fighting machines, armed with cannons and crewed by skilled sailors and janissaries. They were a formidable force that, for a time, was unmatched in the Mediterranean. However, the golden age of the Ottoman navy was not to last forever. The Battle of Lepanto in 1571 was a catastrophic defeat for the Ottomans. A Holy League fleet, assembled by the Pope and led by Don Juan of Austria, annihilated the Ottoman navy in a battle off the coast of Greece. The defeat was a profound shock to the Ottoman Empire and a huge morale boost for the Christian powers. Though the Ottomans were able to rebuild their fleet remarkably quickly, the defeat at Lepanto marked the end of their naval dominance. The technological gap between the Ottoman fleet and the new, more advanced sailing ships of the European powers began to widen. The Ottoman navy, for all its power, was a fleet of galleys, a technology that was becoming obsolete in the face of the new, faster, and more powerful European sailing ships. The empire's focus shifted back to its land-based empire, and the seas, once a source of power and glory, became a source of vulnerability and decline. The seas had given the Ottomans a path to global power, and their inability to adapt to the changing realities of naval warfare was a key factor in their eventual decline. The Empire of the Seas, like the empire itself, had its golden age, and then it faded into the annals of history. The heart of the Ottoman Empire, the source of its immense power, was not a battlefield or a bustling port, but a fortress-like palace complex overlooking the Bosphorus, Topkapi Palace. For centuries, this sprawling, walled city within a city was the residence of the sultans, the seat of government, and a symbol of imperial majesty. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and brutal intrigue, a world unto itself where the fate of millions was decided in hushed tones behind ornate walls. A visit to Topkapi is a journey back in time, a glimpse into the life of an emperor, his family, and the complex web of power, loyalty, and betrayal that defined the Ottoman court. The palace was not a single building, but a series of interconnected courtyards, gardens, and halls, each with a specific purpose. The first courtyard was a public space, where the janissaries stood guard and the public could air their grievances. The second courtyard housed the Divanai Humayun, the imperial council, where the Grand Vizier and other high-ranking officials met to govern the empire. It was here that foreign ambassadors were received in elaborate ceremonies, a spectacle of power and wealth designed to impress and intimidate. But the most intriguing and mysterious part of the palace was the harem, a secluded and highly regulated world where the sultan's family, concubines, and female servants lived. The harem was not, as often portrayed in Western fantasies, a place of debauchery and pleasure. It was a highly structured and hierarchical society, a parallel government run by the women of the court. At the top of the hierarchy was the Valide Sultan, the sultan's mother, who often wielded immense political influence. She was followed by the Khatan Effendis, the sultan's wives, and the Iqbal, concubines who had given birth to a son. The harem was a place of intense competition, with each woman vying for the sultan's attention to secure her own future and that of her children. The ultimate prize was to give birth to a son, a future sultan, which would elevate a woman to a position of power and prestige. The harem also served as a training ground for future sultans, who spent their early years there, educated in the arts, literature, and the complex rules of court life. The life of the sultan was one of immense privilege and equally immense isolation. He was the absolute ruler, the shadow of God on earth, but his life was also bound by a rigid protocol and a constant threat of assassination or deposition. The sultan's day was a carefully orchestrated ritual, from his morning prayers to his audiences with foreign ambassadors and his meetings with the divan. He was a symbol of the empire's power, but his personal life was often a lonely one, surrounded by eunuchs, servants, and sycophants. The most famous eunuchs, the Kisler Agassi, chief black eunuch, were often powerful figures in their own right, with direct access to the sultan and the harem. The Topkapi Palace was also a center of incredible artistic and intellectual activity. The court was a patron of the arts, and the sultan's library contained priceless manuscripts from all corners of the empire. The palace workshops produced some of the finest examples of Ottoman art, including intricate calligraphy, illuminated manuscripts, and exquisite jewelry. The beautiful tiles of the palace walls, the elegant fountains, and the serene gardens were all a testament to the sophistication and wealth of the Ottoman court. The palace was a symbol of power, but it was also a repository of a unique culture, a blend of Islamic, Byzantine, and Persian influences that created a style that was uniquely Ottoman. But the palace, for all its splendor, was also a place of dark intrigue. The practice of fratricide, the poisoning of rival heirs, and the constant power struggles between the Valide Sultan, the Grand Vizier, and the other power brokers of the court were a constant threat to stability. The kafes, or the cage, where potential sultans were confined, was a brutal and dehumanizing practice that often left the future rulers mentally unstable and unprepared for the challenges of governance. The life of the Topkapi and the harem, with its a unique blend of breathtaking beauty, rigid protocol, and brutal intrigue, was a microcosm of the Ottoman Empire itself, a place of immense power and sophistication, but also of deep-seated flaws that would eventually lead to its downfall. The palace was a symbol of the empire's greatness, and its eventual abandonment in favor of the more Western-style Dolmabahce Palace in the 19th century was a clear sign that the empire itself was changing, moving away from its glorious past and towards an uncertain future. The extraordinary longevity and expansive power of the Ottoman Empire were built on the foundation of a sophisticated and relentless military machine. For centuries, the Ottoman army was the envy of the world, a force that could challenge and often defeat the great armies of Europe and Asia. Its success was not just a matter of superior numbers or brilliant leadership. It was a result of a unique military system that was both technologically advanced and deeply ingrained in the social and political fabric of the empire. The Ottoman military was a complex organization, a blend of elite professional soldiers, feudal cavalry, and a highly effective logistical system. The story of the Ottoman art of war is a chronicle of innovation, discipline, and a martial culture that defined the empire for centuries. The backbone of the Ottoman military was the Janissaries, an elite infantry corps that was a revolutionary concept for its time. These were not regular soldiers. They were professional, salaried troops, recruited through the Divserm system, a levy of Christian boys from the Balkan provinces. These boys were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and raised to be a new class of soldier, loyal only to the Sultan. The Janissaries were a highly disciplined and well-trained force, equipped with the latest technology, including firearms, at a time when most European armies still relied on pikes and swords. They were shock troops, a formidable fighting force that could turn the tide of a battle. Their famous war cry, Allah, Allah, and their distinctive uniforms made them a symbol of Ottoman power and a source of terror for their enemies. They were a military institution, but also a political one, a force that both served and, in later years, challenged the authority of the Sultan. Complementing the Janissaries were the Sipahis, the elite cavalry of the empire. These were not paid soldiers, but a feudal cavalry class that was granted land, timar, in exchange for military service. The Sipahis were a highly effective mobile force, known for their skill with bows and swords and their ability to conduct swift, devastating raids. The timar system, though a feudal one, was highly organized and efficient. It provided the empire with a large, well-equipped cavalry force at little to no cost to the central treasury. The Sipahis, like the Janissaries, were a cornerstone of Ottoman military power, a force that was essential for the rapid expansion and control of the empire's vast territories. The combination of the Janissaries, with their disciplined firepower, and the Sipahis, with their mobility and striking power, gave the Ottomans a flexible and devastating army that was hard to match. The Ottoman army was also at the forefront of military technology. They were quick to adopt new innovations, especially gunpowder. Ottoman engineers developed and built massive cannons, including the gigantic cannon used to breach the walls of Constantinople. The Ottoman army was one of the first in the world to use cannons as an integral part of its land army, and their siege warfare was legendary. They were masters of logistics, capable of moving massive armies across vast distances and provisioning them for months on end. Their engineering corps was unparalleled, capable of building roads, bridges, and fortifications with astonishing speed and efficiency. The famous Ottoman military bands, the Mater, with their thundering drums and piercing trumpets, were also a unique feature of the army, a psychological weapon that was designed to intimidate the enemy and inspire the troops. However, the very institutions that had made the Ottoman military so successful eventually became its undoing. The Janissaries, once a symbol of discipline and loyalty, became a conservative and corrupt force. They began to use their power to influence politics, depose sultans, and resist any attempts at modernization. The Timur system, once a source of strength, became inefficient and corrupt, with the Sipahis losing their martial edge and becoming more interested in their wealth than their military duties. While the Ottoman Empire rested on its laurels, the European powers, spurred by the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, were developing new military technologies, new tactics, and new forms of political organization. The Ottoman military, once the most advanced in the world, began to fall behind, a process that became painfully clear during the Russo-Turkish Wars and the Balkan Wars. The destruction of the Janissaries in the auspicious incident of 1826 was a necessary but brutal act of reform, a recognition that the old military machine was no longer fit for purpose. The Ottoman art of war, for all its glory and success, was a product of its time. Its inability to adapt to a changing world was a key factor in the empire's long and painful decline. While the Ottoman Empire was an immense and complex political entity, its true heart was a sprawling, vibrant, and deeply cosmopolitan city, Istanbul. The city, which was once the Christian capital of Constantinople, was transformed under Ottoman rule into a magnificent imperial capital that embodied the empire's unique blend of cultures, religions, and traditions. It was a place where East met West, where the minarets of mosques rose alongside the domes of Orthodox churches, and where people of different faiths and languages lived and worked side by side, under a system of governance that was both highly centralized and remarkably tolerant for its time. To understand the Ottoman Empire, one must understand Istanbul, a city that was a microcosm of the empire itself, a place of immense beauty, wealth, and diversity. The city was a melting pot of cultures, a place where people from all corners of the vast empire came to seek their fortunes. The streets of Istanbul were a symphony of different languages. Turkish, Arabic, Greek, Armenian, Hebrew, and Ladino were all spoken in its bustling bazaars and crowded alleyways. The city's economic life was a testament to its diversity. Greek and Armenian merchants controlled the trade with Europe, Jewish financiers managed the imperial treasury, and Turkish guilds of artisans and craftsmen produced some of the finest goods in the world. The Grand Bazaar, a labyrinthine complex of thousands of shops, was the commercial heart of the city, a place where goods from China to London were bought and sold. The markets, the guilds, and the vibrant economic life of Istanbul were a testament to the empire's ability to harness the talents of its diverse population. The key to this coexistence was the millet system, a unique form of religious-based governance. The word millet means nation or community in Turkish, and under this system, each recognized religious community. Orthodox Christians, Armenians, and Jews was granted a degree of self-governance. They were allowed to manage their own schools, their own courts, to a certain extent, and their own internal affairs, under the leadership of their religious leaders. The Sultan, as the ultimate ruler, provided protection and a legal framework, but he largely allowed the millets to govern themselves. This was not a system of full equality, but it was a pragmatic and effective way of managing a diverse, multi-religious empire. It provided a degree of stability and coexistence that was often lacking in the more monolithic nation-states of Europe. The city's architecture was a powerful reflection of its cosmopolitan nature. The great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, once the heart of the Byzantine Empire, was transformed into a magnificent mosque, its Christian mosaics covered with plaster, and its interior adorned with the intricate calligraphy of the Islamic world. But it was not destroyed. Its unique architectural style and its grandeur were preserved, a testament to the Ottoman respect for the past. The grand mosques built by Mimar Sinan, like the Suleimani and the Blue Mosque, were a fusion of Islamic and Byzantine architectural styles, a new, uniquely Ottoman style that was both elegant and majestic. The palaces, the fountains, the bridges, and the bathhouses were all a testament to the city's wealth and the sophistication of its art and architecture. Life in Istanbul was a blend of imperial pomp and everyday life. The Sultan's procession to the mosque on Fridays was a grand spectacle, a display of imperial power and religious devotion. The call to prayer from the hundreds of minarets filled the city with a sense of rhythm and peace. The public bathhouses, hammams, were a central part of social life, a place where people of all classes and backgrounds could meet and socialize. The coffee houses were centers of intellectual and political discourse, places where men would meet to discuss politics, read poetry, and play board games. The cosmopolitan nature of Istanbul, its unique blend of cultures and religions, was a source of both strength and weakness. It was a place of immense diversity, but it was also a place of deep-seated tensions that would eventually be exploited by the forces of nationalism in the 19th century. The millet system, which had once been a source of stability, became a source of division as the various communities, inspired by the idea of nationhood, began to demand their own independent states. The city of Istanbul, for all its beauty and diversity, was a symbol of an empire that was both magnificent and deeply flawed, a world that was destined to pass into the annals of history, but whose legacy would live on in the vibrant, complex, and beautiful city that it became. The final demise of the Ottoman Empire in the aftermath of World War I marked not just the end of a dynasty, but the conclusion of a 600-year-long journey that fundamentally shaped the history of three continents. The empire's collapse was a seismic event that created a power vacuum, redrew maps, and unleashed a wave of nationalism, conflict, and ambition that continues to define the modern world. The story of the Ottoman Empire is a complex tapestry woven from conquest and culture, from tolerance and tyranny, from innovation and decay. Its legacy is not a simple one of triumph or tragedy, but a multifaceted one that can be seen in the borders of nations, the lines of legal codes, the melodies of music, and the very architecture of cities. The end of the empire was not a clean break, but a messy, often violent, and deeply consequential transition from an old world to a new one. The most tangible legacy of the Ottoman Empire is the political map of the modern Middle East and the Balkans. The empire's territories, once a vast, multi-ethnic whole, were carved up by the Allied powers into new, often artificial states. The borders of Syria, Iraq, and Jordan, drawn by British and French diplomats, paid little attention to the historical, ethnic, and religious realities on the ground, creating a breeding ground for future conflict. The rise of Arab nationalism, a force that had been stifled under Ottoman rule, now flourished, leading to a new era of Arab states that were often more focused on their own national interests than on a broader sense of regional unity. The Balkans, too, were a product of the Ottoman legacy. The nations of Serbia, Greece, Bulgaria, and Bosnia, all of whom had been under Ottoman rule for centuries, now began to define themselves in opposition to that legacy, a process that often led to ethnic and religious strife. The Ottoman Empire, in its death, left a chaotic and deeply unstable world in its wake, a world that is still grappling with the consequences of its collapse. Culturally, the legacy is a more nuanced one. In the Balkans, Ottoman influence is deeply embedded in the local culture, from the beautiful mosques and bridges that still stand to the food, language, and music that reflect centuries of shared history. In the Arab world, the Ottoman period is often viewed with a degree of ambivalence. While some see it as a period of foreign occupation, others recognize the stability and order it brought to the region, and the magnificent Ottoman architecture that still stands in cities like Damascus and Jerusalem is a testament to its cultural footprint. In Turkey itself, the legacy of the empire is a source of continuous reevaluation. The early Turkish Republic, under Ataturk, sought to erase the Ottoman past, but in recent years, there has been a renewed interest in the empire's history, with its art, architecture, and political legacy being embraced as a source of national pride. The magnificent Topkapi Palace and the Süleymaniye Mosque, once symbols of a despised past, are now celebrated as symbols of a great national heritage. Philosophically, the Ottoman legacy is a powerful reminder of the cyclical nature of history. The empire, which began as a small, insignificant beylik, grew to become one of the most powerful and long-lasting empires in human history. It was a testament to the power of human ambition, organization, and a willingness to adapt. But its decline is also a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most powerful of empires are not immune to the forces of change. The Ottoman Empire's failure to adapt to the Industrial Revolution, its institutional sclerosis, and its inability to deal with the rise of nationalism were all factors in its downfall. Its story is a profound lesson in the fragility of power, the importance of adaptability, and the enduring nature of human ambition. The Ottoman Empire, for all its flaws and its glories, was a complex, beautiful, and deeply human story. Its end was not a finality, but a beginning, a new chapter in the history of the nations that it once ruled, a chapter that is still being written today. The final chapter of the Ottoman Empire's long and complex story did not end with a single, dramatic collapse, but with a slow, agonizing fragmentation, a process that saw a 600-year-old civilization dissolve into the pages of history. From the humble beginnings of a small nomadic tribe on the frontier of Anatolia, to the zenith of power under Suleiman the Magnificent, and finally to the humiliating dissolution in the aftermath of a catastrophic world war, the Ottoman journey is a testament to the rise, glory, and inevitable fall of empires. It is a story of conquest and consolidation, of cultural synthesis and political intrigue, and of a unique civilization that for centuries acted as a bridge between East and West, between the old world and the new. The echoes of this great empire can still be heard today, in the borders of nations, the art of 1,000 mosques, the taste of 1,000 spices, and the shared heritage of millions of people across 3 continents. The Ottoman Empire's legacy is a profound reminder that history is not a series of isolated events, but a continuous, interwoven tapestry. The empire's success was built on its ability to harness the talents of diverse peoples, to innovate militarily and administratively, and to build a legal and social framework that, though flawed, allowed for a degree of coexistence that was rare for its time. However, its ultimate failure was a result of its inability to adapt to a changing world, to the forces of industrialization, technology, and nationalism that swept through Europe and eventually consumed it. The story of the Ottomans is a cautionary tale, a reminder that power, no matter how great, is always transient, and that the seeds of an empire's destruction are often sown in the very soil of its success. Today, as we look at the modern states that rose from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire, from Turkey to Iraq, from Syria to Serbia, we see the continuing ripple effects of its long reign. The conflicts and challenges that plague the Middle East and the Balkans are, in many ways, a direct consequence of the empire's collapse and the subsequent redrawing of its borders. But the legacy is not one of just conflict and division. It is also a legacy of rich cultural exchange, of architectural masterpieces, of a unique blend of traditions that continues to define the identities of millions. The magnificent mosques of Istanbul, the intricate art of a Persian miniature, the unique legal codes, and the very spirit of a multi-ethnic society all serve as a powerful reminder of a time when a single empire held sway over a vast and diverse world. The Ottoman Empire may be gone, but its story is not over. It lives on in the hearts and minds of the people who descended from it, in the history books that document its triumphs and failures, and in the enduring legacy of a civilization that, for 600 years, shaped the destiny of the world. It is a story that, when told with a confident and engaging tone, can inspire a deeper curiosity, a desire to explore the complexities of history, and a greater understanding of how the past continues to shape the present. The echo of the crescent, the symbol of the Ottoman Empire, can still be heard today, a faint but powerful sound that reminds us of a time when one empire ruled 3 continents and left an indelible mark on the world.